In the span of just 40 years, two conflicts erupted that would shatter the old world and forge a new one. On one side of the Atlantic, a band of colonists dared to defy the mightiest empire on Earth. On the other, a Corsican artillery officer rose from obscurity to redraw the map of Europe with cannon fire and ambition. The American War of Independence and the Napoleonic Wars, separated by barely a generation, together dismantled centuries of monarchy, feudalism, and imperial control. This is the story of how the modern world was born, not in peace, but in revolution and war. By the 1760s, Britain's 13 American colonies were prospering and growing restless. Victory in the 7 Years' War had secured vast territories, but it had also drained the British treasury. Parliament turned to the colonies to fill the void. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, taxes on tea. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry of a people who saw themselves not as subjects to be squeezed, but as citizens with rights. Tensions boiled over. In 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd of protesters in Boston, killing 5. The Boston Massacre, as it came to be known, was a spark, and more would follow. In December 1773, colonists dressed as Mohawk Indians dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Britain responded with the Intolerable Acts, stripping Massachusetts of self-governance. The colonies had no choice but to unite or submit. On April 19, 1775, shots rang out at Lexington and Concord. The war had begun. What followed was 8 years of brutal, grinding conflict. George Washington, a Virginia planter with limited military experience, held together a ragged Continental Army through freezing winters at Valley Forge and devastating defeats at Brandywine and Germantown. But the cause endured. The Declaration of Independence, penned by Thomas Jefferson in the summer of 1776, proclaimed a radical idea: that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. The turning point came at Saratoga in 1777, where a decisive American victory convinced France to enter the war. French troops, ships, and gold poured across the Atlantic. In October 1781, at Yorktown, Virginia, a combined American and French force trapped General Cornwallis and his army. The siege lasted 3 weeks. When Cornwallis surrendered, the war was effectively over. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized a new nation, the United States of America. But the significance went far beyond borders. For the first time in modern history, a colony had thrown off imperial rule and established a republic founded on Enlightenment principles. The reverberations were immediate. Democratic movements stirred in France, in Haiti, across Latin America. The American experiment had proven that self-governance was not a philosopher's dream. It was possible. Across the Atlantic, France was consuming itself. The revolution that began in 1789 had spiraled into chaos. The reign of terror, the guillotine, a fractured republic. Into this vacuum stepped Napoleon Bonaparte. He was young, brilliant, and ruthlessly ambitious. By 26, he had crushed the Austrian army in Italy. By 30, he had seized power in a coup d'etat. And by 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French, placing the crown on his own head in a deliberate act of defiance toward the Pope and every monarch in Europe. The Napoleonic Wars that followed were staggering in scale. From 1803 to 1815, Napoleon's Grande Armée swept across the continent. At Austerlitz in 1805, he shattered the combined forces of Austria and Russia in what many consider the greatest military victory in history. At Jena, he dismantled the Prussian army in a single afternoon. Kingdom after kingdom fell. The Holy Roman Empire, 1,000 years old, was dissolved with the stroke of a pen. But Napoleon was not merely a conqueror. Wherever his armies marched, they carried the ideals of the French Revolution. Feudalism was abolished. Legal equality was introduced through the Napoleonic Code. New nation-states emerged from the rubble of old empires. The political map of Europe was redrawn in ways that persist to this day. Yet hubris would be his undoing. The invasion of Russia in 1812 proved catastrophic. 600,000 men marched east. Fewer than 100,000 returned. Emboldened, a coalition of European powers closed in. Napoleon was exiled to Elba, escaped, rallied France one final time, and met his end at Waterloo in June 1815. He was banished to the remote island of St. Helena, where he died 6 years later. But the world he had reshaped could never be put back together. 2 wars, 2 continents, and between them, the complete transformation of the modern world. The American Revolution proved that a people could govern themselves, that liberty was not a gift from kings, but a right. The Napoleonic Wars proved that the old order of Europe, its feudal hierarchies, its divine right monarchies, could be broken. Together, these conflicts planted the seeds of democracy, nationalism, and self-determination that would define the next 2 centuries. Every revolution that followed, in Latin America, across Europe in 1848 and beyond, drew from the precedents set in Philadelphia and on the battlefields of Austerlitz and Waterloo. The early modern period did not end quietly. It ended in gunfire and upheaval. And from that upheaval, the world we know today was born.